It's 1:38 a.m. Time for Octoberpod. Good morning, and thank you for joining us. You're just in time. Time travel. It's a concept that's captivated scientists, writers, artists, and philosophers for centuries. Many have deemed time travel impossible, citing as evidence the absence of time tourists from the future. And yet history is filled with tales of strange folk who seem disjointed from the present. The texts and tales of countless religions feature time travelers, to say nothing of the case of John Titor, or the man from Torrid. And what of the little old lady chatting on a cell phone in the Charlie Chaplin film? More recently, a photograph has surfaced, which some say depicts climate activist Greta Thunberg in the year 1898. The tale you're about to hear was submitted by a man who swears it to be true. Is it a case of mental illness or something more difficult to explain? We'll let you be the judge when you hear Come Hither, Come Yon, which begins after a word from our friends.
Hey guys, my name is Tara.
And my name is Jessica, and together we co-host the podcast, Three Spooked Girls.
If you love the paranormal
Or murder.
Join us every Monday as we tell our listeners about a new spooky tale or true crime case.
We'll have a special drink recipe each episode picked out by me for you to enjoy while we scare the hell out of you.
You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever the hell else you listen to podcasts.
Come hang out with us and get your spooky on.
Hello, Ed. How's it doing? This is Dennis from Mountain City, Tennessee, and I'm listening to your podcast on the mighty Stitcher podcasting app. I never like to talk about the weeks Daddy had nothing to say. That was the beginning of what the doctors at the time diagnosed as some sort of psychotic break. I was 12 years old at the time, and I remember Daddy coming home off a swing shift. When he worked the third, he'd just shuffle off to bed just as Mama was getting me off to school. Then, whenever we saw him, he wouldn't speak to a soul, and this would go on for a stretch of days and days. One night, Mama went to bed early, and me and Daddy stayed up watching TV. Now, I loved sitting up late with Daddy watching TV during one of his quiet spells. That meant I could turn the TV to whatever program I wanted. We were watching something, and he turned and looked at me. He had this awful look on his face, and the flicker of the TV made him look almost ghostly-like. And he said, "I've been here too long. The longer I stay, the longer I will stay," he said. I told him I didn't understand what he was talking about, and then he proceeded to tell me this long, convoluted story about how he was a member of a sort of tribe of what he called travelers. Now, these travelers were capable of identifying doorways that only they could traverse, doorways that would take them to another time and place, and to times within a 40-year window of the traveler's birth years, 40 years before or 40 years after. Daddy said that he's never traveled farther back than 1942, and he never traveled further into the future than today. We had this talk around Thanksgiving of 1999. Well, I said, "Daddy, you're joking, right? This is scary." At first, I played along like it was a joke, but this seemed to make him angry. He kept on giving me details. Daddy told me that when you exit a doorway, you're a different person. New body, different age. You could be a man or a woman or a child. It was a roll of the dice. But he said if you keep traveling, you can just about live forever. He said that he usually traveled with the rest of his tribe, going through doorways together, setting up new lives together, and then leaving together. He said the last time he traveled, he exited the door as a 7-year-old boy. Members of his tribe placed him with an adoption agency. That's where he claimed my Nana and Pawpaw adopted him. I already knew he was an adoptee. And from there, he just grew up like a normal kid, got married, became a father. Daddy said that the rest of his tribe moved on years ago, and he slowly began to forget who he really was, all the past lives he'd lived. I just wanted to prepare you, he kept telling me. I've been here too long, and I'll have to travel again soon, but probably not until after Christmas. Now, I still thought he was kind of joking, but I played along, and I asked him why he had to travel. Why not stay with me and Mama? He told me never to tell Mama anything he just said. Then he said, I'm all through talking, and started watching TV again. We both dozed off halfway through some Western that came on. I believe it was Adios Sabata with Yul Brynner. His quiet spell ended the next day. Everything returned to normal for a while, and honestly, I didn't think anything of our conversation. Maybe he'd been joking like I thought. Maybe I'd fallen asleep in front of the TV and just dreamed that we'd had that conversation. Or maybe I was awake and Daddy was halfway in a dream when he talked to me. Well, that didn't last long. Whenever we were out, Daddy started looking off in the distance at things that weren't really there. We were with my uncle on his farm. He'd bought a new hunting dog that he wanted to show off to Daddy. The dog lot was a bit of a walk from the house. And as we walked, Daddy kept looking way off in the distance at something on the hill behind the dog lot. He asked my uncle, who is that guy? What guy? Fella in the black hoodie. When my uncle and I assured him there was nobody there, he just stopped in his tracks, grabbed me by the wrist, and we ran back to the truck. He didn't talk again for a whole week. Another time, me and Mama had been out shopping with my cousin on Black Friday. Daddy met us for supper at the Olive Garden. He was laughing and joking, telling funny stories about guys he worked with at the tire company. And then he stopped mid-sentence, got up from his seat and headed straight out of the restaurant. Mama told me to go with him and that she'd ride back with my cousin. He almost ran off and left me before I could get in the truck. Well, I begged him to tell me what was going on as he peeled out of that Olive Garden and off into the highway. And he said, remember that conversation we had several weeks ago? He goes, I didn't tell you about the others. We call them the fleet ones, for whatever reason. They're kind of like the traffic cops. They don't want nobody to find out about the doorways, you see. Traveling. Only travelers can see them. If they find you, they drag you off to somewheres. Maybe hell. Nobody knows. Nobody that's ever been dragged off by them will ever come back to tell about it. I've seen other travelers dragged off, and it ain't pretty. It's like they drag them off by the soul. I asked Daddy if that was what he'd seen at the farm and at the Olive Garden. He nodded and told me he sees them all the time now. He said he'd been here too long and they'd get him if he didn't travel again soon. This is what finally frightened me enough to tell my mother. She didn't seem as surprised by this news as I figured she'd be. Maybe she already knew. Maybe he'd been taken by one of these crazy spells before. So we hauled Daddy off to the doctor's appointments and CAT scans and MRIs and blood work and therapists. They weren't able to diagnose him with anything specific, but they gave him a cocktail of meds, antidepressants mostly. They figured that would help, and they did, for a while. He took his pills and went to his follow-up appointments like a good boy, and everything seemed even keel for the most part. Except sometimes I'd catch him doodling in an old notebook we kept next to the phone. Pictures of men or old hags all in black with no faces. Sometimes he'd scribbled over the blackness where a face ought to be so hard that the pen tore a hole in the paper. The type of thing you see in all kinds of scary movies. And except every now and then he'd flip past an old episode of Quantum Leap or Doctor Who on our PBS affiliate, and he'd say that those shows must have been written by travelers, because in both shows there's a time traveler that changes his identity in some way. He'd also read a lot of old sci-fi novels, especially Brian Aldiss. I remember he had a battered, dog-eared copy of Dracula Unbound, and he came up to me one evening and he showed me all these references to Fleet ones that he underlined. He just looked at me and arched his eyebrow up as if to say, "Found me another traveler." Then one evening he was doing dishes. Mom was off at Bible study. He started singing to himself. The tune was kind of like Ramblin' Man by Hank Williams, except he sang it with different lyrics. There's an open door in front of me. There's faces in the mirror I've got to see. But then they'll claim my soul before the dawn, and lovers will meet. Come hither, come yon. I never knew him to ever listen to Hank. I'd never heard him sing before in my whole life. Well, Christmas came and went that year, but Daddy didn't go nowhere, and I sort of figured that Daddy was cured of his compulsion, or whatever it was, and I sort of forgot about all of it. I wish I hadn't. That way I would have paid more attention to all the times he'd wander off to inspect sinkholes and animal burrows, or check out the rear exits and sub-basements of department stores. In hindsight, it's easy to see that he was looking for doorways. I guess anyone else would have found his behavior odd and suspicious right off the bat, but to us, with Daddy, it didn't seem odd at all, especially after a lifetime of suspicious behavior. Then, one weekend around Groundhog's Day, he was driving me out to look for this comic book store way down in Unicoi County. It was gray and cold that day with just enough rain to make everything look wet and greasy. Daddy turned to me and he said, "You know, Dennis, if I ever did travel again, chances are good I'd end up somewhere in your lifetime. I'd be sure to look you up." I started crying. It was a real ugly cry. I yelled at him. I told him that may be true, but if it wasn't a bunch of bullshit, and it probably was, I said you'd come back, but you wouldn't be you. I kept repeating that. You wouldn't be you, Daddy. You wouldn't be you. We drove all the way out to this comic book store without saying another word. We got there, and he bought me just about everything I wanted. I still have those books. And then we drove back home, but we took a detour through Johnson City, and he bought me this big lunch at the Red Lobster. Just me and my dad. Turned out to be a great day. The best day. A week later, he went missing. When Daddy didn't come home from work one night, we chalked it up to one of his strange spells. But by supper time the next day, we called the police. It didn't take long for his truck to turn up. It was parked on a gravel road up in the mountains, right up against a barbed wire fence that marked off a few acres of posted property. Police said there were no signs of foul play. Daddy had even left his keys in the ignition as if he'd be right back. But maybe he was leaving the truck behind for us to pick up later. And Mama still has that truck. I think it still runs. Me and Mama kept the lights on for him and stayed involved with groups of volunteers who kept searching for Daddy long after the police had moved on to other priorities. But in our hearts, we knew Daddy was gone for good. We were right. Daddy's never seen again. When I got my driver's license, I used to go on long drives in the mountains. More often than not, I'd end up along that fence row where Daddy abandoned his truck. I never did it to look for Daddy. I guess I wanted to poke around and see if I could find the doorway. I know it sounds stupid. There was a rotted out log that might have done the trick, but who knows? Daddy could have walked a mile or more into the woods looking for it. Yeah, that's crazy. That sounds crazy, I know it. Still, whenever I'm back in town, to this day, I'll look twice when I see someone dressed all in black, especially someone that doesn't seem to belong, and I start thinking about Daddy's fleet ones. Sometimes I have dreams about the fleet ones come swarming towards me across stormy seas, swarming like these great big flocks of migrating birds, blacker than that. Still, there are other times when I catch a stranger staring at me from across the street, or over from the far corner of the Walmart or something. I've convinced myself that they're staring at me as if they know me, even though I've never met them before. Then I wonder if it's Daddy wearing somebody else's body and living somebody else's life. I wonder if Daddy walked through a doorway to find me. But it isn't really him. Not really. You have been listening to Hither Come Yon on Octoberpod.
Welcome to Your Decisions Matter. In our normal episodes, you are asked to listen and make decisions using your skip button about fictional stories involving anything from nuclear bombs to time travel to aliens. Stop being told stories and start taking control of them. Do you decide to become immersed in this new interactive podcast? Please subscribe to Your Decisions Matter now on your favorite podcast app. Or do you decide to let others tell you how the story should end? Just don't forget, your decisions matter.
A weird horror, sex, Valium, pill poppers, coke, wine, a cult, a theater, a psychotic killer actress. If you want to be bothered or entertained, read The Cat That Caught the Canary by Anne Fox. Spoiler, it's a novella. Read The Cat That Caught the Canary, the shocking first book by Anne Fox. Available now at Amazon.com.
Hello, listeners. I'm Jaden McKell, and welcome to Straight-Up Enigmas, a podcast to explore the unexplained. Spine-tingling supernatural stories, true crime, and riddles from the ancient world are all things to expect when you tune in to Straight-Up Enigmas. Like the time we discussed the mysterious death of Alyssa Lamb, or shared terrifying true stories from real people about sleep paralysis and shadow people. In one of our most recent episodes, I told the story of Debbie Kent, the sister of my dad's best friend from high school, who was abducted and murdered by serial killer Ted Bundy. Join us every Tuesday and dive into the world's weirdest riddles, unsolved cold cases, and ghostly encounters. You can find our Straight Up Strange episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts.